Hello, and welcome to the podcast series entitled In the Footsteps of St. Francis de Sales. My name is Father John O'Neill, and I am an oblate of St. Francis de Sales. It is my pleasure to be your host as we journey in the footsteps of this great saint. In this podcast, we will focus on the Museum of the Monastery of the Visitation in Annecy, located beneath the Basilica on the Rue de la Visitation. As you enter the museum, you may be immediately struck by the waxed effigies of both St. Francis de Sales and St. Jane de Chantal, located towards the center of the room. Please take some time to view the effigies and the details, not only of the figures themselves, but the case itself and the manner in which the great saints are dressed. These effigies were originally on display in the Church of the Third Visitation and were brought to the present monastery in 1911, when the relics of the two founders were transferred. The wax effigy of St. Francis de Sales is clothed in an alb which he wore during his lifetime, and a chasuble embroidered for the second centenary of his canonization in 1865. The reliquary was donated by Count Paul Francis de Sales and Countess Sophie de Sales. The relics of the saint are in the basilica in front of the side altar on the left. The effigy of St. Jane Frances de Chantal is clothed in a habit that she wore during her religious life. The reliquary was donated by Queen Marie Christine of Sardinia in 1828. The relics of the saints are in the basilica in front of the side altar on the right. Beginning on the left side of the museum from the entrance, there is a series of display cases containing some original artifacts of the founders, as well as many pictures, copies of books and writings of both saints, as well as the gardens and images of the first monastery. Fortunately for visitors, there are several cards, some in English, describing a number of the artifacts in the cases. In the next case, you can see early editions of the spiritual directory so dear to the heart of St. Jane and the practice of Salesian spirituality for all visitandines. Also included with the directory are early copies of the custom book of the Visitation, as well as the liturgical rite for the giving of the habit to the sisters. Located there also is a reproduction of an image of St. Jane from the monastery in Turin, as well as a rendering of St. Francis with two of the first visitandines. The original of this portrait is on display in the gallery where the sisters originally lived after their foundation in 1610. The gallery is now part of the convent of the Sisters of St. Joseph and is prominently displayed also an original profession cross of one of the early visitandines. Also on display in the case is a copy of the second edition dated 1665 of St. Jane's commentary on the rule and constitutions of the Order of the Visitation. In the same case as well is a picture of the passageway of the bishop, which St. Francis de Sales would have used going to the cathedral. Also depicted in this portion of the case is a picture of Francis's predecessor, Monseigneur Claude de Granier, who under Pope Clement VIII selected Francis as his coadjutor with right of succession in 1599. Interestingly enough, St. Francis de Sales could have chosen to be ordained a bishop immediately, but out of respect and deference for Bishop Granier, he declined to do so until after the death of the bishop in 1602. Beside the picture of Bishop Granier is the stole that Francis wore for his episcopal consecration. Moving further along in the displays, there is a copy of a page from his voluminous collection of letters, followed by a copy of St. Francis receiving the bishop's mitre during his episcopal consecration on December 8th, 1602, at his home parish of St. Maurice in Turin. In the next portion of the case is a sketch of the fortress at Les Alanges, where Francis and his cousin Louis would regularly seek shelter and safety in the evenings after returning from their missionary work in the Chablais. Just below the sketch is an embroidered alb used by Francis during his lifetime. Also in the cases is the missionary cross worn by Francis in the Chablais. Besides a walking stick used by Francis, there is the image of the cross formed by a scabbard and sword on the road. Quotation, "It is necessary to take up the cross because God has called us to it." In the following case, there is displayed the bonnet indicating that Francis held a doctorate in both canon or church law, as well as civil law from the University of Padua. Included in the case is a picture of the cross in concrete, indicating the site of the ancient castle of the Sales family in Toulon. The cross is also referred to as the Inspiration Cross, where Francis was inspired to found a religious community of sisters, which would later become the Order of the Visitation of Holy Mary. In the final case is also found portraits of Francis's father, François de Boissy, and his mother, Françoise de Senonaz, as well as a shield displaying his episcopal coat of arms. That concludes our tour of the museum. You are encouraged to visit the monastery gift shop located outside the museum on the left.